Welcome, everyone. My name is Nadia Myre, and I'm the Curator of Programs and Education at the Gardner Museum. Welcome to our 3-work series. This program is part of our Renaissance Venice Life and Luxury at the Crossroads exhibition, which runs until January 6, 2022. You will notice your mics and videos are muted and the chat option has been disabled. There will be a Q&A following today's conversation, and so we invite you to send us questions through the Q&A function at any point. Please note that the closed captioning provided is automated and any information that appears is not reviewed for accuracy. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Toronto is located on the treaty lands and ancestral territory of the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Petun, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The community we work in is the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to learn and live on this land. Today, we're very excited to welcome Nadia Myre as our guest speaker, who has a work featured in our Renaissance Venice exhibition. Nadia will be in conversation with Sequoia Miller, the Gardner Museum's Chief Curator and Deputy Director. They will speak to 3 of Nadia's works in relationship to the theme of transformations. I'll now turn off my video and mic and hand it over to Sequoia.
Thank you, Nahed, and hello and thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening. I'd love to begin by introducing us to Nadia Myre. Nadia is an Indigenous and Quebecois artist from Montreal who instigates conversations around identity, resilience, and the politics of belonging. She holds degrees from Kamloops College, Emily Carr University, and Concordia University, from which she earned an MFA in 2002. Myre is the recipient of numerous awards, having most recently been awarded the Compagnie des Arts et des Lettres de Québec in 2019. She was awarded the Sobi Art Prize in 2014 and is currently on the faculty of Concordia. Her works can be found on permanent exhibition at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, the National Gallery of Canada, the Musée National des Beaux-Arts de Québec, the Canadian Museum of History, and the Museum of Civilization in Quebec. I'm also happy to say that her work is entering the Gardner collection as well. Hello, Nadia. Welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me. Really looking forward to our conversation, Sequoia.
Great. Me too. So happy to be able to speak with you. And as many of your fans will know, you have an exhibition opening in a couple of days in Montreal. So let's start by taking a deep breath.
Yeah.
In and out. And maybe it's a strange moment, a funny moment to be sort of taken out of that installation process where your work is just sort of this group of work that you'll be showing, which is just kind of on the cusp of moving into the public realm, which is always a real transition from the ideas and the thoughts and the images that are alive in your studio to a work that really starts to engage with the broader public. So as you sort of stand on that edge, or that precipice, I'm curious if you could speak to kind of how that feels right now, thinking about the work that's about to be public.
Wow, what a great question. For sure, it's a little nerve-wracking, and especially since I think, coming to this moment, the work was a little bit hard to birth, and having a kind of clear sense of what the exhibition would be. But the show is titled Eyes Watching and Other Work. And really kind of, it's artistic interpretation of the pulse of what's going on in Canada. And in light of, the recent findings of residential school survivor burials and and all of this, so there's that component of the work, which is a series of photographs that are I would say pirated from the Smithsonian collection.
Piracy is a great place to begin with. Maybe we could bring up the first slide, because that's an image of one of these works that's based on some Smithsonian archival imagery.
Yeah, so right now we're just looking at 6 of them. The series is called Intangible Tangles, and there's quite a few hundred, but for the exhibition, I've managed to kind of pull together, I don't know, somewhere between 50 and 60. We'll see later tonight when I go back to the gallery what works. And yeah, so these images are taken from the Smithsonian Digital Online Collection of moccasins and then treated and printed and framed.
There's a lot of places that we could sort of enter this work, and maybe I'll start off by asking about absence and sort of the transition between subject and object. And when we look at shoes or at objects that are associated with our bodies, very clearly, the sort of presence or the absence of the body that would inhabit the object is, at the forefront of our minds. Wondering if you could speak to how you're thinking about the absences that are embedded in these images.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I was thinking a lot about Christy Belcour's work, Walking with Our Sisters, and also just a lot of the kind of makeshift memorials that people were making this summer, when we first heard the news. I remember being in Victoria at the Ontario kind of, pardon me, legislator anyway, and just seeing like these kind of like makeshift memorials of shoes and
You're a busy lady.
it's a production problem.
We can help.
I'm getting a phone call.
There's an art emergency happening.
There's a bit of an art emergency happening for a minute. So I don't know what to do. If I could just pause for a second and take.
Sure. Yeah,
all right.
That's fine. Actually, yeah, you can. Yeah, go ahead and mute yourself unless you want us to participate. And so maybe I'll kind of speak a little bit about how I see these works in Nadia's as Nadia's taking a moment here. So the work, as Nadia mentioned, is based on these archival images that are part of the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History archive. And the photos, I don't know the exact dates offhand, but they probably date to around the turn of the 20th century. And they're part of the whole sort of system of using photography as a sort of tool of anthropology in a way. So when Nadia comes back on, I'm hoping to ask her about that sort of engagement that she's had with photography for a long time, and how it has been used to create evidence, basically. Photography, like any tool, has this wide range of applications. And here, in a way, I think one thing that I find so compelling about these pieces is that she's using photography to sort of claim back a certain kind of evidence or a certain kind of knowledge or way of being in the world that is putting these images to a very different use or a very different purpose than they were intended originally. Maybe another thing to point out about these images has to do with the beadwork that's on them. So of course the moccasins are beaded. Two of the images here we're looking at the tops, whereas others were looking at the soles. So Nadia has often used beadwork as aspects of her kind of larger project. So thinking about how the historical beadwork is figuring into these pieces is interesting to me as well.
Thank you, Sequoia.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You were speaking about the sort of makeshift memorials that started appearing over the summer as the news of the discovery of the remains at residential schools was
yeah. And one of the things, I mean, the Smithsonian collection and as other collections, but especially this, the way that they've photographed the collection, I was incredibly drawn to, because you have this real sense that the body is lying down and it's in this very confined space, right? And what we're seeing are either the soles or the vamp part of the moccasins. And so I thought that was kind of like almost like a ready-made where I could just kind of take this image and slightly shift it, you know, and then kind of, yeah, I'm dead curious what it's going to look like in the space.
That's part of that standing on the edge. You really don't know, right? Like you don't see, it doesn't, such a funny thing, like the artwork doesn't exist really until it exists in the world, kind of.
Yeah, but so far, I'm really excited about the effect, and it's printed on a Moab silver, so the image is, you know, a little bit kind of ghostly and has a very kind of metallic feel, and I think that it gives a lot to each of the, you know, each of
Mm.
the images, each of the photographs. So
I think with the color shift that you've done, and now, as you said, they're printed on metal, it almost evokes like a tintype of a, you know, a late 19th century photographic process that was in fact used to document Indigenous people across the West, in particular, in the US and Canada. And one thing that I brought up while you were on the phone was the sort of the use of photography, and thinking about how photography and anthropology sort of developed as tools together for colonization, for sort of structuring knowledge and development of science. And you, of course, have used photography for quite a while in your work. I'm curious how you think about photography as a tool, specifically for anthropology, and then also for you.
yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I didn't kind of like naturally come to photography in my work. I kind of like meandered through it, but I was deeply influenced as a young child, by photography, and especially of Indigenous people and of the collection. And you know, I have these like beautiful memories of, I think my mom was actually working in Victoria at the at the museum in Victoria um to kind of like clean these images. So I remember kind of like growing up with them, and they're always like larger than life, you know?
Mm,
And so I think that somewhere in there that kind of got uh yeah, translated of really wanting to see kind of like contemporary culture, but also put a spotlight on the history, you know, and and blow it up. But these pieces are small, they're discreet, they're only about 8.5 inches high, you know, at the most. So they're really kind of confined. So I'm trying something different.
mm.
Um, but yeah.
It's interesting how photography, to speak to the theme of transformation, photography really is can exist at many different scales, right? It's scalable for sure. And as you say, these pieces are on the smaller side, whereas, you know, a good amount of your of the photography work of yours that I've seen really makes things quite a bit larger. So that, particularly, say, the beadwork, so that we really kind of see it in a different way, and it transforms our kind of physical bodily relation to the objects or to the images, as well as the sort of visual information. So, and here also with the color, it's like photography as this tool of transformation, sort of turning something from an image with one set of meanings or intentions to another set. Does it feel like a reclamation process, sort of, for these pieces? A
It does,
reclaiming?
especially for these pieces. Yeah, especially for these pieces.
Mm,
I think in the other works, like in the large scale photography of the beadwork, I'm thinking about something different, you know. And and part of that is like wanting to kind of like monumentalize the bead, you know.
mm.
And now, and maybe this is a good moment to transition to the next. I don't know what the next slide is, but I'm thinking maybe it's the Park Hyatt work. Oh, here's a detail, right? And so, you know, a lot of the work that I've been doing is to like think about like this beadwork on a large scale. And what's become more and more exciting is as I move from one material, right, which is like these tiny little glass beads, photographing them, and now making ceramic beads. Um, to kind of like reproduce something that's similar. So what we're looking at is a ceramic woven textile.
It's great because there's not an obvious word for it, which is amazing. It's like a textile, it's ceramic, it's kind of wampum-like. It's got all these different elements, aspects.
Yeah, yeah. And this piece is, I think, about 60 inches wide by 100 inches tall. So it's it's quite a large piece. Yeah. Yeah.
So the title of this piece, as we see, is Where Beavers, Deers, Elks, and Such Beasts Keep. The image of the piece looks a lot like it's drawing from the Dish with One Spoon wampum. I'm curious if you could sort of speak to the connection between the title and the use of that image.
Oh, that title comes from kind of a speech that was recorded and orated during a discussion around the Dish with One Spoon wampum. So, to me, they're kind of like they're speaking about the same thing. We're talking about the area, right? And the area being the St. Lawrence Valley. So, between Toronto and Montreal, all of that area is really kind of connected. And what I love about Dish with One Spoon is really that I think of it as like indigenous to indigenous protocol first. And um, and so that's like the thing of how we inhabit and how we share the space together. Um, yeah. So, and this title reappears in other works as I'm kind of working through these ideas, whether I'm actually kind of reproducing kind of like the motif of the Dish with One Spoon or thinking of it in a different way. Um, and in fact, I think there's a piece of public sculpture that I just proposed that has the same title. But to me, it's all about the same negotiation and same moments of protocol and, same moments of like um, resituating the understanding between, between all the different players of the area. Mm-hmm.
Given that the original wampum was, as you say, a protocol, an indigenous to indigenous protocol, how do you see this functioning now in a space where there are so many settlers, like myself in Toronto?
That's a great question. I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of start making work about it was I part of my practice is also performance based, and I remember being in Vancouver for a festival called Push, where people could kind of promote their performances in these really like mini, reduced moments of the performance. And one of them was a performance crew from Toronto who did a land acknowledgement in Vancouver around the Dish with One Spoon, and I was going like, wow, this really is kind of weird, Question mark, what? And so I think that's kind of what seeded the idea for me to kind of like think about what is the Dish with One Spoon and re-territorialize it, to the area that we're really talking about so that it doesn't become something that can be kind of exported to Vancouver or to Japan. As a I understand the connection that they wanted to make, right? Because for sure it's all opening when you say, oh, we're sharing the territory kind of equally, and but really what it is it's not about sharing the territory, it's about ensuring that future generations will also have access to, the plenitude that we have. And that's not really what the case is at the moment, right? With global warming and environmental, situation and the peril of the animals and the trees and the forests and, industry and industrialization and all of that. So to me, it's a reminder. And I wanted to include it in this show in particular because it's really close to the Gardner Museum, but it's also across the street from the Royal Ontario Museum, where the Dish with One Spoon original wampum resides, right?
It carefully tucked away, right?
I think so. I have never seen it, but maybe.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's ever seen it, actually. Every person I ask is like, I've never actually seen it. Yeah. I'd love for you to speak a bit to materials and to labor as it relates to this work. So this piece is, as you say, ceramic. These are ceramic beads. And of course, wampum is made of shell, quehag, and and Welk. And I'm curious how you think of sort of the importance of the material that the work is made out of.
Well, I mean, it's not a wampum because
Yeah.
it's not made out of that material. But I am interested in these techniques, these woven techniques, right? The assemblage of putting these pieces together, and in relationship to kind of like an Anishinaabe practice too, right? Of how to do that. And so that's what I'm drawing on in the work is you know, working with these kind of custom looms that I had built so that we can kind of like support making larger works. And and now with the introduction of like while I'm crafting my own beads, it's like it's endless. It's beautiful. It's like I have so many ideas. And this particular work, I think there's over 12,000 beads that are
Wow.
handmade and glazed with over 63 different glazes. And so, you know, to glaze a bead is to kind of literally brush the glaze onto individual beads, right? And then to weave it. So there is a lot of process and labor and experimentation too, and failure.
Yeah, especially with ceramics, there's always a lot of failure, right? And I've heard you refer to these as pipe beads, which relates them to pipe stems and sort of ceramic pipes. So do you see is that a direct allusion that you're creating here?
It was my first inspiration, I think, was being in London and finding these like remnants, these shards of pipe pieces, and going, "Oh, there's a hole in it. Oh, is it like
Mm.
it's a bead, you know?" And then also looking back to kind of like the history and the culture, you know, at a certain point in the 19th century, you know, pipe beads or pipe bone was really kind of wanted, right, as an embellishment. Not, I mean, and people have made like vests, but they're not necessarily to protect in war, right? They're more like um, beautiful garments. So there is definitely something that I'm thinking about in relationship to, you know, the size that I'm using or yeah, the this vertical kind of stack.
Mm. And is it right that these types of beads were sort of how you started working in ceramic? And I'm curious about sort of how that process was for you, because I understand that you weren't, you didn't go to like ceramic school, or maybe you did a little, and there's often a bit of a kind of hurdle or of an entry point. I'm curious how it felt to sort of have the impulse to do it, and then the first couple times you got into it.
I'm just gonna push the camera back for a minute and go get something.
Sure.
So it's not necessarily a desire to work in ceramic, but I don't know if you can see this because I don't know what I can see,
We
but
can go out of the slideshow for a sec if you don't mind. Oh, wow.
so this is like a test of a piece that was done in 2014 for a public art commission. And so this desire of kind of like translating beads on a larger scale, right,
Mm-hmm.
has definitely like inhabited my spirit for a while. This test was made by Mosaica, and um we could go back to the slideshow, but I wanted to bring it up just to say that I've been trying different things for a while. And what I like particularly about this method is the weaving process, that it is kind of like its own structure, that it can support itself actually, even though they're really heavy, right? So um, I find that exciting. But you're right, like I'm not sure what my relationship to ceramics is yet still. I mean, if you ask Patrick Mann, he was my ceramic teacher over 20 years ago at Camosun College. I was the worst, you know.
Mm.
I was I liked the glazing part, but I didn't like the way clay felt on my hands.
Hmm.
So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Right now, I'm not making the beads, but I hope to start maybe in January and see how that goes. One of the pieces we're showing, or I'll be showing at Armure, is another woven piece like this, but instead of using glazes, now we're using stains to get kind of a gradation. And the clay is absolutely lovely. It's got this real kind of bone chalk quality. It's incredibly porous and reads like charcoal, and so I'm pretty addicted to the material of it. We'll see how I do,
Hands on, right?
hands on, yeah. But and I told you this in a previous conversation. I think I went to NCICA a couple of years ago and was like, oh yeah, this is a really exciting, interesting political material,
Mm-hmm.
and
Absolutely. And you've
something.
just alluded to that by saying how by using stains rather than glazes, it evokes a bone in a way, in a very clear way. And, clay has that sort of continuity between a sort of metaphorical allusion to the body, right? And either as bone or as flesh, actually, in its raw state, as well as to the land itself too. And it feels like you're sort of looping in both of those kind of ways of perceiving or understanding the material in a work like this, because it is body-like in a way. It's a physical object that moves and that can change shape, but it's also completely tied to a sort of evocation of a specific place of the earth.
Exactly, and I'm pretty excited.
That's great. Do you think of these as having like a piece like this? So this is hanging, vertically. It's almost like a tapestry or it's a wall work. Do you think of them as having a sort of like it could be kind of crumpled a little bit, or it could change shape, that it could lie on a large plinth of some kind and be like a three-dimensional terrain in some way?
Definitely. And the piece that came right before this, which is at in the McMichael collection, actually, is a black and white stripe. Here, I could go get a picture. No, I won't. It's a black and white stripe that's quite long and horizontal, and really can be like it is a sculpture. It is displayed on a plinth, isn't hung, could be hung, but I do like, especially because it's woven, right? It holds its own kind of like structure and can create like these interesting shapes. And so that's something that I'm definitely going to be exploring further.
Mhm. One thing that I'd love to ask you about in relation to this work and to the previous work, um, that relates to this idea of holding its own structure is the notion of sort of systems of knowledge and artworks as being kind of tied into differing systems of knowledge. And it, as you mentioned, the allusion in this piece to an indigenous to indigenous treaty is evocative, or comes out of a particular system of knowledge, whereas the archival images from the Smithsonian are representative of another system of knowledge, a sort of classificatory and colonial system of knowledge. I'm interested in how you think about your artworks as, I don't know, sort of either engaging or representing in or coming out of these different ways of organizing knowledge and information. Maybe not information. Maybe it's really more about knowledge than information.
Well, I'm not sure how to answer to that question. I think, I think my role as an artist is to kind of continually kind of push and question, you know, what's in the archive, what's public knowledge, how do we perceive it, how is it stored? I mean, two things that we kind of talked about is, this fact that everybody knows what the dish with one spoon is, but no one has seen it, right? We've only seen reproductions of it. And, similarly to the Smithsonian collection, I've applied a bunch of times to be an artist to work in the collection and, haven't had the opportunity. So, on a certain moment, there's kind of like a barrier to access, right? And so I'm accessing what I can, um, whether it's pirated or invented or imagined, right? Because I've only seen photographs of the dish with one spoon. So part of it is also imagined. And even in that photograph, is it like a drawing? Is it a photograph of a draw? Like I can't even
Yeah.
remember if it's actually the, photograph of an object or photograph of a drawing. So, the artist is intuitive, and I find my role as one of, yeah, deeply trying to intuit, what these things are and how they might take shape, and also to kind of see how I might reinterpret them.
Mhm. I think one thing you're speaking to is the sort of speculative function of the artist as a way to navigate an archive or navigate multiple archives, and the sort of barriers, as you say, or the kind of limitations that they put up. If you don't, like, not having direct access to the objects, um, you know, forces, you could say, or enables you as the artist to kind of use speculative tools to reframe them, to kind of loop your way into them, to then engage with what they can be now and how they can help to sort of shift some of the relationships that are that kind of guide our society, say.
Hmm.
I guess it feels like, in a sense, that sort of speculative and archival function is pretty central, and in a way you do that in the work that relates to the Venice exhibition, which maybe we could go to that image. And there's like an archival element to this project as well, for sure, and this kind of speculative component that I think is so effective in helping us see links that are there, but that are not as evident because of the way that archives and knowledge are sort of structured and categorized. So maybe you could give us kind of an introduction to the works that we're looking at.
Sure. So, I mean, we're looking at two things right now. We're looking at kind of like a part of an installation, and then this wallpaper design. And in this exhibition or in this work is also an audio component. So the entire piece, the wallpaper, the beads and heart and audio component, is titled Oceanus Priscillium. And then the kind of the moment of like these, I don't know, gold beads, which are from Venice actually, and are beaded to kind of like represent the graph and geography and navigation, and systems of kind of mapping, interlinked with smaller beads that are speaking more to kind of like indigenous kind of understandings of life and connection to nature, and kind of more like being holistic in a different way, a different type of knowledge, with this heart that emerges from it all. And I don't know what the heart is, so don't ask.
Well, you're lucky you told me not to ask you, because that's what I was going to do. Maybe I could ask you why you felt like, so the heart is made out of ceramic, right? And then it's glazed to kind of gold. I'm curious how you felt that ceramic was what you wanted to work with for that part of it.
I mean, it's a good question, and just to be clear, I didn't physically make the heart. I had somebody else make it. Mel Arsenault made two hearts for me,
Hmm.
for this exhibition in Venice, in case one broke, right? So I would have
Yeah.
a backup, and as it stands, both survived, and so there's the one at the Gardner right now, but at the same time, there's the one at the Musée des Beaux-Arts, right?
Mm.
So now this work has kind of like um, I don't know, addition of two, you could say.
It's like
Um,
cell division, right?
yeah.
Mitosis, yeah, and sort of growing as it.
And I was, yeah, I think I was influenced, by these, you know, by the idea of worlds coming together. And one of the things that happened when these worlds collided was, this whole other system of belief, which was somewhat tied to, indigenous system of belief of believing that there is a creator or God. So I was thinking a lot about the heart of Christ also, and that kind of that moment. um and then the wallpaper is kind of like the backdrop of those two worlds colliding, and in what my version of a damask might look like, where
Mhm.
you have one of Columbus's ships, and tobacco mixed with kind of these first images that of the new world of Hochelaga that went back to Venice, right? And Venice kind of printed them and published them. So at a certain point, it was a connection of like uh, these two worlds kind of like understanding each other, or maybe not understanding, but uh, seeing one another, right? And so Venice published these very famous kind of maps, and so we understood, yeah, of what Hochelaga, how the city was fortified. So I think that's what I was speaking to, and different kind of creation stories. So the creation story of Christ versus the creation story, Haudenosaunee creation story in this case, of Sky Woman falling.
So we see Sky Woman there in the center of the damask wallpaper. Yeah,
Yeah. Although there is no center really, but
right.
in
In the in this image, yeah.
in this image, yes.
I think so. This, as Nadia mentioned, this work is on view in our current exhibition, Renaissance Venice: Luxury at the Crossroads. And one of the aspects of the work that's so central is sort of tying in, Venetian, both like visual culture and Venetian kind of manufacturing, you could say, within a kind of larger colonial project, and the movement of beads and the value of beads and glass beads in particular, both like among indigenous communities and really globally, and through Europe, as sort of standing in or being linked to these different systems of knowledge. And um, I guess I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about beadwork in particular, and how you feel um, how you feel like beadwork has been an important aspect of sort of thinking through indigenous knowledge for yourself.
Yeah, I mean there's also kind of like the darker moment, right? Which I hadn't really talked about, where these Venetian beads would be placed in these large ships, especially slave ships, and be used as ballast. And so, there's this moment where when you get to the worlds that you're going, you're exchanging glass beads for bodies, and bodies for, enslavement. And and then the other connection, especially to kind of indigenous culture, is like replacing, there's a very rich history of working with like porcupine quill or quagga, wampum, and moose hair tufting, and very rich history of kind of embellishment. And so all of a sudden, like, these beads become part of introduced into the culture, and introduced in a way that is also kind of like as a way of like colonizing towards the idea of Christ, right? So there's, I think, Robert Hule makes this really beautiful kind of connection between the 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 aspect of like beading, right, which is kind of like to think of one's relations, but also like that the word bead is, the etymological root is related to kind of like God, right? So
Hmm.
you can think of it like as a way to kind of like translate the practice of praying with a rosary, for instance, right? So there is that connection, definitely. But at the same time, I hope that there's kind of like a contemporary comment, that doesn't just kind of like end there. I, there's lots I want to say, but I'm also reminded that this will like live in perpetuity.
We can stop the recording now and then you can actually It's so funny, isn't it? That's part of the like recording though. That's part of the like system of knowledge and structuring knowledge, because in all of these systems, we sort of are, we think through particular modes or through particular channels. And when you're say when you're working with beads or when you're working with clay, it's like your mind starts to function with that material, with that mode. And when you're speaking, it works in a verbal or in a literal language. And there's a ton of ways that you and I or us in the gardener community or us in lots of different communities could learn from each other, say, and could learn to know each other and learn to understand each other, perhaps. And it's funny that this one way that we're doing it sort of through this like Zoom remote thing opens up certain kind of possibilities or certain ways of talking, but also limits others, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I think because we're looking at your work and because we're talking about the sculpture or art or kind of visual art objects, there's a way in which they circumnavigate language, right? That it's not explanatory, like, and there are aspects that are happening in the work that we can't speak to, that are experiential, basically. And I think I'm also kind of wondering whether you were able to go to Venice when this work was on view there, and how the work read or felt to you in that space versus in the other spaces that you've now seen it, or that it's been, such as Montreal or Toronto.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I was in Venice and I was part of the installation. I was there to install the work and to see how it was viewed. And but I think in Venice it was part of it was like a project, so it was like a project space. If you see it, I haven't had the pleasure of seeing it at the Gardner yet, but I hope to soon. And if you see it at the Musée des Beaux-Arts, well, all of a sudden it's like a bijou, it's like I don't know. It's like, but also the installation at the Musée des Beaux-Arts, they used this damask wallpaper for the entire room. So actually, yeah, it's incredible. Everybody's work is kind of like hanging on the wallpaper. Uh, and then in these glass vitrines, there's other works by other artists, um, and including my piece. So
Mhm. So wallpaper is a really different mode of production, say, than most of your work, which is so much about fabrication, I guess. Whether it's you or whether it's someone else, say, is with the heart. I'm curious how you think about the sort of mechanical reproduction, so to speak, of wallpaper and the kind of endless role, so to speak, that can emerge from it.
yeah, I mean, I think it's really fun. I hadn't really considered it as a tool, but to me it definitely lives in the realm of like video,
Mm.
as an artist, as a practicality. And I first kind of started making, this is my second wallpaper piece. I first started, thinking about it for an installation I did in Glasgow at the Brigade as part of Glasgow International in, I don't know, 2018 maybe. And, that space in the Brigade is huge, but it's also just kind of like the interior concourse. So it's kind of like, well, how do I occupy this space in an intelligible way without, that's cost kind of efficient also. And that's where I came up with this idea of creating, in that case, like a toile de jouy that spoke to the connection between, the fur trade and tobacco trade and Glasgow's kind of tobacco barons and all of that. And then kind of also had artworks by other artists that I hung.
That's always a good strategy, actually.
And thinking of the vitrine in the museum space and that kind of fabricated moment of ideas kind of colliding in a short read. Yeah. So that's kind of how I think about it. But and maybe that's because I'm not a designer, Yeah.
But, I want to remind everyone that we're happy to take a few questions from the attendees. If you'd like, you can just pop them into the Q&A. And Nadia, maybe I'll ask you still about this piece. I'm thinking about our theme of transformation and the subject of the slave trade that you brought into the conversation that's sort of implied in a way in this piece. And I want to ask you about beauty and the role of sort of beauty in terms of kind of transformed materials or kind of matter, basically, that's been transformed into an artwork or into sculpture. And so much of your work is just so beautiful, is so kind of lovely to look at. It's very materially rich. It's very tends to be very kind of sensuous. I'm curious how you think about, in a work like this, how you were using or are using a kind of beauty or a certain sort of allure, and how that would balance or counterbalance some of the more critical aspects of the work.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's definitely something that I think about, and have thought about quite a lot in my practice. And, I think my early works were more tongue in cheek. I was thinking more through humor, because I was, trying to figure out how to grab the viewer's attention. And one of the things that I realized for myself anyway was that humor is a great strategy, but maybe it doesn't leave as much of a lasting moment. The minute that the brain can kind of go, aha, oh, I get it, then the work is finished. And I think that's where I kind of decided to turn more towards aesthetics and labor and process as a way to kind of do the difficult work of engaging the viewer over a period of time. So even if they are looking and they get the idea right away, the fact that there's quite a lot of labor involved, or that it is something that you want to sit with for a really long time, because you're having a moment, a physical moment in relationship to the work. To me, that's kind of like where I'm trying to operate. But there is also the pitfall of just, making something too beautiful that the ideas get lost, right? So there's definitely kind of like a delicate balance. And at the same time, I'm also thinking of different strategies now, well, what is the relationship of time? So in the last few years, my works have included sound as, as a moment of creating a time space where the viewer would, be present for. Yeah.
It's interesting to think of sound or audio as a way of putting about not boundaries exactly, but creating a container, so to speak, for for the work to exist and for the viewer to exist within the work. And I'd say one thing that we're not seeing in this work is, or feeling right now, is the impact of the sound element of it, which in the gallery is actually pretty profound, maybe. Or it's a very kind of, gives you a real sense of being enclosed by the work, or sort of being there in that time space is actually a really great phrase or word to describe it.
Yeah, and also, I mean, speaking to that,
Another art emergency.
yeah. Let me just go grab my Zoom again. Speaking to that, at the same time, a lot of what I'm trying to do is also create things that don't have beginnings, middles, or ends, that are kind of like a circular moment, so that you don't feel like you've missed anything if you come in the middle, but you still get a sense of, you know, what it is or what's being described as it's happening. So that's important, and it's, you know, important to my video work. Not all of it, but quite a lot of it.
That's interesting to think about in looking at your work. Do you feel like that's an element in the project that you're installing now in Montreal?
Definitely, there's a video piece as part of the work, and you know, it's an idea, and you can come in throughout it and get a glimpse of what that idea is, or you can sit through the whole thing, you know.
Yeah. Nadia, thank you so much for spending some time with us. It's been really fantastic to talk again and to look at the works together. Could, you know, whatever, break a leg with the rest of your installation.
I'm so sorry about all the phone calls and the pings and everything.
Yeah, it's great. It's actually, I mean, this is the, like, you know, it's life of an artist. It's really, it's an interesting slice, especially for folks who don't participate in this end of it a lot. And again, so the exhibition opens on Thursday. It's at Nadia Myre in Montreal, and everyone who is able to go to Montreal, I hope you can make it. And yeah, also please do remember that Nadia's work is on view at our Renaissance Venice exhibition up through January at the Gardner. Yeah, thank you so much.
It's such a lovely time to, yeah, such a lovely time. I had a lovely time in conversation with you.
I did too. Thank you again. Thanks everyone for joining, and yeah, stay well.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.